I hope you've all had a chance to look at the tent outside with all the different papers that have been printed out there for you to look at. The aim of that was just to illustrate what new developments there are in fossil finding, and not only that, but in examining fossils and paleontology. There's so much fossil evidence these days, it's actually quite astonishing, and it's great time to be a creationist at this present time in history. A number of types of fossil evidence that we have are tracks. We've got amber, lithified remains in sedimentary rocks. We've got coprolites or dino dung. We've got skin impressions, and we've got some skin, and we've got biochemicals. So each one of these we're going to have a look at. These are some famous footprints from Tanzania, the Laetoli footprints, and they are footprints that are preserved in an ash flow, lava flow. If you look at them in close up, it would almost look as though they are normal human footprints. If you have a look at some analysis of it, of people walking in mud type terrain, you'll see that the toe usually is a bit more splayed. So if it's a natural person that's walking around without shoes, this is, as far as I'm concerned, quite a good representation of what the footprint would look like. The National Geographics of the world tried to put Lucy into those footprints, but I don't think, if I'm correct, that there's many bones of Lucy's foot. The other animal tracks right next to it. There are a lot of dinosaur tracks that are there, as well as something I didn't mention, which is dinosaur egg nests. So a lot of footprints of different kinds of animals are all around the world. There's an interpretation of how these footprints, what do they mean? Many times you will have footprints going in a similar direction, and some people will say, well, that's a herd just walking in one direction. Otherwise, it could be that animals, in our terms, would be trying to escape the flood. There's description of some footprints which seem as though the dinosaur was actually struggling to walk in water in tiptoes. So it makes sense of those footprints being formed in a flood. We've got some amber. There's a lot of discoveries of amber fossils. This lizard that supposedly is 99 million years old. The questions that you have to ask is, how does it stay so well preserved, and how does the amber stay preserved for so long? And that's an issue that you will come to as well just now, looking at organic products. But it's amazing what you see in all these amber samples, is that you can identify lizards, you can identify a mosquito or a moth or whatever's trapped in there, whether it be a wasp, or you can identify it as something that we recognize today. So it kind of asks, you have to ask the question is, why have these animals stayed so constant over the periods of time that have supposedly gone past? But also it tells us as creationists that a lizard has always been a lizard. A flea has also been a flea. And that any other animal that's been trapped in amber remains as part of the original kinds. You've got lithified remains. In other words, whatever organism was buried has been completely turned to stone, in other words, completely promineralized. This is an example of a horseshoe crab. So you have some preserved that look exactly the same morphologically as the ones that we have found today. You can find a lot of these. We term them living fossils. Another a good example from South Africa is what we quote as the coelacanth that was discovered, I think, in 1948. So it was originally supposedly a an extinct creature until they found it swimming alive and well. So there are many other examples, trees, insects. There's an interesting one, living fossil, like a fir tree. It's a Wallaby pine, which was thought to be extinct and then discovered. So when one looks at the fossil evidence, supposedly it is going to teach us that God did create according to each kind, and the remains that we find largely to a great extent are due to Noah's flood. We come into the slide of dinosaur bone sections. If we have a look at that, the dinosaur was supposedly fossilized 68 million years ago. So the question you have to say is then is the conclusion is that this bone has supposedly survived that long. And the contents within that bone have survived so long. So what we have and the biggest, in the least magnification, is obviously the bone. Then you have the tissue in higher magnification, and then you see the tissue that's actually elastic. Then you'll see some blood cells within the vessel, and then at the bottom you'll see actually what we call osteocytes. Those are cells that actually form bone. So the question we have to weigh up is it more likely that it's as old as people claim it is, or is it more than likely only from Noah's flood time, which is only about 4,000 years ago? If we look at more examples of bone under the microscope from these fossils, you will see that it has been confirmed over and over again. If you manage to look through the tent, you'll have found that the original paper that responded to this finding was questioning whether the blood inside these dinosaurs was actually real blood or just an artifact of sorts. I think they called it, can't remember the term now, but say again? The dinogenic product. Thank you, Jonathan. So we've got that as a supposed explanation, because the scientists involved obviously thought, well, surely after so much time there was no chance of this blood cell really sticking around that long, and so he thought that it was a particular chemical reaction or something that would have allowed this thing to look like red blood cells. But in fact, after doing all the kinds of tests and numbers of things that you can read there, you'll see that they are actually the real part of the dinosaur left behind. So we can be sure that this has been done. It's been done more than once. There's scientists that are of the creation persuasion that have also done this on Triceratops horns, and there's a full report on the outside of the tent showing why things are able to survive and why the traditional or the secular explanations are fallacious as to how things could last so long. We've also got skin impressions, which are very interesting. You can see it as more reptilian skin, which is this one that you'll be looking at now is a hadrosaur skin impression. People have also found a reptile skin. I mean, that just looks exactly like a lizard, and under magnification you can see that it is indeed reptile. And when one takes samples and looks at the molecular structure of certain things, the collagen, and you compare it to known collagen, you can actually see that there is tissue from that organism left behind within the rocks. So the people are quite sophisticated in what they are able to do with all the tests and get different results. And it's quite amazing. This is infrared spectra of mosasaur and monitor fibers, lizard fibrous tissue, and type 1 collagens. So scientists are checking everything for contamination, and there's more than one method used to detect the molecules. So they are very thorough in what they're trying to do. What I find interesting is this is a moa eggshell which has, there's DNA still visible there. And one has to ask, this is 19,000-year-old eggshell supposedly, and yet so how do we account for the organic remains? Biblically it's quite easy. We know that things are not as old as things are claimed. So if we've got this problem, then we've got at least two choices. Organic remains decay within a few hundred years unless they're preserved. So our options are the organic remains are preserved by mechanisms yet to be discovered. Number two, the remains are not the original soft tissue of the organism itself. Or number three, the time frame in question is wrong. And four, the mechanism of fossilization should be investigated. So when you're looking at whatever position you're coming from, you must look at all these questions and see what is the best solution as to why we have what we have in front of us. Okay, fossilization is supposedly a slow and uniform process, and they say this is telling us that after death an ammonite slowly sinks to the sea floor, scavengers feed on the fleshly body of the creature, and after only several weeks all that remains is the shell. Okay, several months later, after the death, the shell becomes covered with silt and sand. The layers continue to build, providing a shield around the shell and protecting it from damage. Time continues to pass and more layers are deposited. After 300 years, the shell is several feet beneath the surface. Gradually, chemicals in the shell go under a series of changes. The shell slowly decays. The water is infused with it. Minerals pass through it, replacing the chemicals in the shell with rock-like minerals like calcite, iron, and silica. So then over millions of years, the original cell is completely replaced with the minerals, and what remains is a rock-like copy of the original shell. Fossil is the same shape as the original object, but is actually rock. Okay, well that's just the typical thing that our children are taught, or you are taught at university or school or whatever. But the question is that exactly the right method of preservation? What we see is rather the fish or the animal dies, according to them it sinks to the bottom, it gets slowly covered and then gets fossilized. But that is not exactly what we see happening when the fish dies. The fish dies, it floats, gets scavenged, the little pieces go to the bottom, and basically there's nothing left. So the mechanism, the traditional mechanism of fossilization, at least of swimming creatures, is fallacious. Where we would come in and say, well, we would prefer to see this, the fish is busy, it's live, it's going about its business, it's alive, not dead. It gets breakfast. Suddenly Noah's flood has been triggered, the turbidity current comes with a massive sediment and is dumped upon the animal. It is now encased, eliminates bacteria, eliminates oxygen, eliminates scavengers, and dies and becomes either fully or partially permineralized, which would look something like this. And the rate of permineralization, as we call it, depends on the conditions, but it does not take eons of time. I just want to show you some items from Creation magazine which will illustrate it. Here's our first one, which will show us that fish that was having breakfast. So for fossilization, one needs certain conditions: rapid burial and mineral in solution. The rapid burial excludes oxygen and bacteria that break down organic materials, and yet we still find organic materials in place. And Noah's flood actually provides that environment. This ichthyosaur was buried while giving birth. Obviously, this did not happen over millions of years, and fossils like these are found in sedimentary rock, and that means that these are rocks that are formed by water laying down layers. Okay. Then we have to ask what the type of animals that can get fossilized was originally an issue. We now see jellyfish, soft-bodied organisms are increasingly being found. Jellyfish, this comes from the Burgess Shell Formation. There's octopus, and there's the middle one you'll see is a diagram describing it, showing the ink sac. There's actually a fossil that people have extracted the ink and are still able to use it to write with. So we need to ask the question, how are these biochemicals staying around? We have a fossilized cowboy leg inside a boot, and we cannot attribute long periods of time to that. It's basically the right conditions surrounded that leg. The hat, or the fossil hat, the dinosaurs wear hats, is the question. Gradual seeping of waterborne minerals ended up solidifying the hat. Fossil formation doesn't take long periods of time necessarily. And the next question we've got to ask then is, well, if these periods of time are illusion or fabricated or just man-made, then we need to ask the question, did dinosaurs live together with man? And what happened to them? We've got, this is a photograph of the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia, which is dated secularly at 1200 AD. And it's an aerial shot. It's in Cambodia in Southeast Asia. And the insert of one of these inscriptions or reliefs, whatever we need to call them, carvings, has a set of animals and living creatures, and in the middle, associated with them, is a pictograph that is showing what we would identify as a stegosaurus, and that is only 800 years ago. And that means that either stegosaurs were still alive, dating back 800, well, from that period of time, or that there was people who had recalled the description within their memory of that organism being alive. So, in other words, grandfather could have said, these animals, and I'm going to draw one for you, is what we used to see, although they might not be around at the present time that they did that relief. But what it is it's within the age and the memory of mankind. And this is not copied from our modern textbooks. Here's some more brass engravings on a bishop in Carlisle Castle, and what one will see is long-necked dinosaurs having a tussle. So again, that is dated at 1496. So either his ancestors that saw these creatures and drew them and were able to do it relatively accurately, or they were still around at the time of that particular bishop. So the conclusion then is that man did encounter dinosaurs after the flood, and they are just extinct animals that we unfortunately cannot see today. There's a fantastic book, Untold Secrets of Planet Earth, Dire Dragons, that there's a couple of examples that I want to give from here. This one is from South America. You have a sauropod being surrounded by what looks like tribesmen trying to either kill it or capture or do something with that animal. But it's definitely not a squirrel or any other kind of animal or whatever you're trying to turn that into. These are genuine. This particular engraving was attested to by a secular professor of that particular area in South America, so it's not just a fabrication. Over Europe, there's a lot of castles with dragons. This one, as you can see, it doesn't have any wings, so it is more than likely a good description of some kind of dinosaur there. Here's another one. There's some particular, craft that people have made, which kind of match up with dinosaurs that we've kind of reconstructed today. We have pots with the Protoceratops on the top. That is, again, I think that's Central America. Then in North America we have this sauropod petroglyph that looks pretty clear, as a sauropod can't really interpret as anything else. And where we can say this is the closest that we can get to kind of a description of one of these things in the Bible. Job 40, look at the behemoth which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close knit. His bones are like tubes of bronze. His limbs like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God. So sauropods were probably described in this particular way by Job. So he, I'm going to guess, would have seen an animal like this, and he would have been able to describe it firsthand, and not like many Bible translations will say elephant or hippo. I think the tail gives it away completely. So when people at the end of the day need to realize that what previous civilizations called dragons are what we call dinosaurs. So when we look at all the information, we need to ask some questions. How did these molecules stay there so long? You will see one paper that will tell us that DNA's half-life is 521 years, and yet you are finding DNA in dinosaur bone. You need to make a choice. When we're looking at our biblical worldview, and you've got different criteria and facts and evidence, you need to try and make it harmonious. Now, if you're getting a conflict of issues, you need to try and make a rational decision. The rational decision is that you need to question the time frame, not the research that is out there, because the research is repeatable. The time frame, we can never know exactly how many years ago that these animals existed, but we will know that it's rather within the 1,000-year realm rather than in the million-year realm. So I would hope that people one day will start questioning the time frame and not how long can these molecules last. There's a paper there which is attempting to give a solution to that problem, because the evolutionists and the long age of people do not want to question the time frame. So what they tried to do is to say, well, let's see, how can this organic tissue stay alive, stay preserved so long? The one mechanism that was thought was if iron is the preservative. So the person took ostrich steak or something like that, ostrich tissue, put it in a solution of iron, and it stayed preserved for a period of 2 years. Now, suddenly in the popular literature, you will read that this supposedly solves all the problems. You've got an experiment that lasted a whole of 2 years, and people are satisfied with that in contrived conditions, because you can preserve a piece of flesh for 2 years, that now suddenly something that's out in the supposed, what I would call wild, that dies and is covered by mud, can suddenly survive a very long period of time, never mind 2 years. So the encouraging thing is that people are not stopping researching this. One of the latest papers that was out was an attempt by somebody to find out how can something be preserved. So they killed humanely a ostrich and put it out in the open somewhere near a running stream, and wanted to see how would this decompose and would this possibly be fossilized or preserved. It's not going to fossilize. It's investigated that where they put it was near a stream. Now, is that almost trying to set up the situation that you would want, say, some mud to come down and cover this dead ostrich? Were you hoping to keep away predators of sorts? you have to ask all these kind of questions when you read these papers to find out, are they really setting out a real situation which something could fossilize? As far as I'm concerned, the realistic situation is the Kruger Park. How many giraffes are fossilized? How many springbuck are fossilized? We don't see that in action. We don't even see it close to happening. When we come across bones, they're usually disarticulated and they are all over the place, or they're half chewed by jackals and hyenas. So although people are trying to research to try and figure out how these things happen, when you come across the information, try to ask critical questions and try and bring it into reality, and you'll find that this, at the end of the day, the real solution is that Noah's flood is by and large responsible for almost all of the fossils that we see around us. So the message I'm hoping that we're going to get across from this conference is that we must make your worldview logical and consistent. Jesus was crucified, died, and rose again. Jesus walked on water. He healed the sick. He calmed the storm and fed the 5,000. Jesus was born of a virgin. By him and all things were created. And 5, in the beginning was the Word. If you believe Jesus' miraculous conception, his miracles, his death and resurrection, then in order to be consistent, you ought to believe that he created miraculously as well. And as I see, as well as see there's a miraculous return. All these things really only make sense in that biblical creationist worldview. Thank you.